Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, August 8th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about Michigan. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh just got a punishment from the NCAA. Did not have to do with the sign-stealing scandal, but I want to break down that a little bit and give you guys an idea of why you never really know who's going to know, but at the end of the day, it'll definitely be one of those things that will affect Michigan for quite some time to come. Then we'll get into a little bit of fall camp intel. We'll bounce around to a number of different places. Some injuries are starting to roll in, so obviously that part of camp is starting to kind of come around. Then we'll get into the players that have to make the most of camp. We have 6 more teams for you. We'll likely finish this out tomorrow, I believe. Then we'll get into a little bit of a recruiting update, a couple of big-time commitments yesterday, as well as a ton of buzz around some quarterbacks possibly flipping in the coming days and weeks. Then we'll get into conference questions. We'll get into the ACC today and break down some of my biggest questions going into that conference that is going to be all over the place this upcoming year. But before we start, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen. Also on the Sports Network page, you can use the super chat for YouTube. You can put super thanks, you can put whatever you'd like in there, and I will absolutely have it on the show. So another fun feature for you guys to get a little bit more involved here. But if you want to use the tip and donation link, that is gsmcpodcast.net. And if you want to use the super chat, it should be right there below this video. But let's jump in and let's talk about Michigan. And there is a ton of updates around Michigan and a ton of talk around Michigan, obviously, as this starts to unfold. And one of the big things that happened yesterday was Jim Harbaugh was given a punishment. And this has nothing to do with the sign-stealing scandal. This has to do with the recruiting violations known as Cheeseburger Gate. So definitely a very another thing added to the Michigan pile of allegations and things going on around that university. And there's a lot of different things that people have kind of pulled from the last couple of days. And the biggest thing I think I've found is everyone wants to know who knew, who didn't know. And I think that's obviously a normal response. I don't think there's any question that a lot of people want to know, did Jim Harbaugh know all the details of this sign-stealing scandal? Did he know everything that was going on? And it sounds like, at least according to him, he did not. So I want to break down this quote for you. He was asked about it at Chargers minicamp, talking about the NOA that the NCAA sent out to Michigan and said, never lie, never cheat, never steal. I was raised with this lesson. I have raised my family with that lesson. I have preached that lesson to my teams that I have coached. No one's perfect. If I stumble, you apologize and you make it right. Today, I do not apologize. I did not participate, was not aware or complicit in those allegations. So for me, it's back to work, attacking each day with enthusiasm unknown to mankind, as he usually says. But Jim Harbaugh is denying this outright. He is saying he had no knowledge of what was going on in the sign-stealing scandal, and obviously he has already gotten punished for the recruiting violations, which we'll get into here in a second, are a little bit ridiculous, but we'll get into that in here in a second. But I do think it's very interesting. Obviously, everyone wants to know who knew. Everyone wants to know, did Jim Harbaugh make this a thing? Did he kind of order this to happen? Did he just was totally in the dark? Frankly, I would lean a little bit more towards he didn't fully understand what was going on. I understand that, you are a head football coach, you are someone in the NCAA, you should know the rules and be able to point out when someone is breaking those rules. So it's not necessarily like him not knowing is a big defense of him, because he should know. That's his program, and there was something going on that was going to put his program in danger. Not knowing that is a whole other problem. But there are also some people arguing that this is just entirely a lie. He totally knew what was going on. He totally understood what was going on. And, well, I'm kind of in between on that. I'm not necessarily sure what the what's going on there and, who all knew and how this kind of played out. But more than anything else, I think the biggest thing here is what happens to Jim Harbaugh does not affect Michigan going forward. So as much as I want to know who knew, as much as I'm interested in all of the different stories that could come out of this thing, and absolutely we'll update you guys when we get them, it doesn't affect college football. It doesn't affect this Michigan program going forward, because he was just handed down a suspension for a year and a 4-year show cause, and there's no real reason for it. He's in the NFL now. He has a 4-year deal with the Chargers. He's not going anywhere for 4 years. And if he ever does come back to college, which he's not going to, let's just be totally honest, it wasn't going to happen before this punishment was handed down. It's definitely not going to happen now. So I can't imagine he is going to be the head coach of any college football program going forward. So frankly, I don't really care what his punishment is. I understand that this is the guy at the head of the snake. This is the guy that everyone wants to know all the gory details about, but the reality is he does not affect Michigan anymore. He was a part of that university, and yes, some of the things that he did could affect that university, but I'm not worried about any punishments that are just handed down to Jim Harbaugh, particularly this last one, because frankly, it's goofy. You're suspending a guy for a year. You're once he finally does come back to college football in this hypothetical world that the NCAA has conjured up in their mind, and he also has a 4-year show cause. He's not going to have to use that. It doesn't matter. He's one of those guys that, it would matter if he was still the head coach of Michigan. But frankly, if he was still the head coach of Michigan, the NCAA wouldn't have given him this punishment. I think they saw an opening to say, we have someone that we know is not really going to get affected by this. We can throw down what looks like a really aggressive hammer and still have a guy get off scot-free. And it makes us look tough, but you're not actually being tough. So I said it yesterday, I believe, on my Twitter, where I just said this is the perfect encapsulation of what the NCAA is all fluff. There's not really there's not fear that's put around by the NCAA that gets into the hearts of really anyone in college football at this point. They are very much a kind of overseeing eye that no one's really scared of. And it's one of those things that I understand, you don't want to push these guys into really tough positions and you don't want to create a weird environment in the NCAA, but you have to have rules and you have to have a system where a head coach of one of the major universities in the country can't just say no, and that's the end of the conversation, because that's essentially what happened here. They can hand out whatever punishment they want. The reality is Michigan just stood there, said, we're not complying with anything you're doing, and it sounds like what they're going to get off with is a big-time fine and possibly their head coach being suspended for the first couple of games this season. So it's not like they made the wrong decision. I'm having a hard time sitting here and saying Michigan did everything wrong here and Michigan should have complied with the investigation, because the reality is the most people that have complied with NCAA investigations get really bad penalties, and the ones that don't get off pretty nicely. So the reality is Michigan handled this the same way that your favorite team would have handled it, the same way my favorite team would have handled it, and we would be in the shoes that every Michigan fan is in right now. We would be in the shoes of saying it didn't matter that much, which I don't necessarily fully agree with, and I'll get into that here in a second, but we would be Michigan fans. And then on the other side, Michigan fans would be coming at Ohio State fans, or Oklahoma fans would be coming at Texas fans, because that's what we do. That's what college football is in a lot of different ways. So getting into kind of how much this mattered, how much the sign stealing and all of this different stuff going on around Michigan really mattered in their quest to win a national title. You can't tell me that it didn't matter. I refuse to believe that there's anyone out there that believes that understanding that play action is coming, or understanding that there's going to be a number of players running crossing routes into your zone, thinking that doesn't give you a huge advantage is insane to me. I understand that you still have to execute the play. I understand you still have to make the tackle. Knowing that the running back that is getting the fake handoff is not getting the fake handoff is a leg up that they should not have. That's just the reality, and although Connor Stallions was gone for the back end of that season, and frankly, it's not to take anything away from that team because it was a remarkable team. They did a number of really incredible things down the stretch of that season. They had 15 guys off to the NFL. They had so many different things go their way and so many great things about that team. It doesn't change that a little bit of it is just a little bit tainted to me. And going back to kind of who all knew and how far up this went, I don't really know. I don't think we'll ever really get a satisfying answer to that question. I think we'll get rumors. I think we'll get, allegations. We won't get anything really concrete. And that's obviously a relatively frustrating thing as we kind of head into this new era of Michigan football and trying to figure out, how is Sharon Moore going to deal with this, which is a whole other topic of conversation where he got a job that should be a dream job that he can, catapult his career into, and he's gotten thrown pretty much every single hurdle you could possibly get thrown at him. So overall, I think it puts Jerome Moore in probably the toughest spot of anyone, but kind of going back to Who all knew, who all didn't. We'll never get an answer. We'll never get what we want to get from that. What I will say is Sharon Moore and Jesse Minter are very good play callers. They're very smart people, and if Connor Stallions is standing behind them saying run cover two here, I think they'd be a little bit surprised. I'm just going to put it that way. I'm not necessarily saying that they absolutely knew what was going on. I would be surprised if they weren't a little bit skeptical of what was going on at the very least. So, overall, I think, we can say what we want about Michigan. We can break them down. We can say that, they were totally cheating and that was the only thing that led to their success. It's not remotely true, but you're more than welcome to say that. Overall, I think when you're looking at what this future holds, we can talk about Jim Harbaugh until the crows rise. It doesn't matter overall how much we talk about Jim Harbaugh. That's the guy on the screen. He's the one leading the program. Sharon Moore is the one that is going to bear most of these results down the road, whether it's him getting suspended or his team not playing as well because there's so many distractions on the outside. This is the guy that's going to handle all that. This is the guy that shoulders it's going to fall on. And frankly, I think we can talk about whether it's fair or not that that's the case. But the reality is, I do think this is a person that we focus all this energy on Jim Harbaugh and on the past Michigan teams. I want to know all the answers that you guys do. But at the end of the day, I also want to know what's going to happen with Michigan going forward. And that's frankly what defines college football for me going forward, where you have a huge program that is being faced with, about as many hurdles as you possibly can be. And a lot of them were put there by themselves, don't get me wrong, but it definitely does put them in an interesting position going forward. So all in all, we can talk about Jesse Minter, we can talk about Sharon Moore, we can talk about Jim Harbaugh and how much they knew about Connor Stallions and how well they knew him and if they knew all of the things that were going on. I care about that for Sharon Moore. I don't necessarily care about that for Jim Harbaugh because he's no longer in college football. It doesn't affect Michigan, at least in the sense of if they're handing down a punishment to Jim Harbaugh, it doesn't affect Michigan. It absolutely could. Some of the different things that Jim Harbaugh did during that time to kind of make the NCAA mad. Let's just be totally honest. So it's one of those things that I understand the questions are out there and we will want all of the answers. And I frankly want all of the answers as well. But as I look more and more into this, as we get further and further down the road, I'm just trying to figure out where does Michigan sit right now? Where do they go forward from here? And I don't know if it's the greatest footing by any means, but it puts you in a spot where we can talk about this all we want. At some point, we're going to have to move forward. At some point, we're going to have to see what Michigan is going forward. And then maybe we can make some judgments after that if they start to fall back off. But the reality is that was a really talented team. They did steal signs. They did absolutely cheat, and they should be punished for that. But I watched him beat Alabama in the Rose Bowl. I watched him beat Washington in the national title. I didn't see Connor Stallions on the sideline. And I'll just leave it at that for the time being. But let's take our first break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about fall camp intel. We have so many different things to break down. The sad part about this is a lot of them are injuries. We're getting to that time of year where some guys are getting injured out for the season. Definitely a really tough time of year. But we'll break down all of the things you need to know on that front right after this. So stick with us.